Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. We're taking your phone calls at 855-236-3228. That's 855-236-3228. Mario in California. You're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Mario.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, go for it, sir.
So I have a few questions, I guess. One is, how is sin defined? And I think it was Michael Knowles who claimed on your show when he was subbing in one day that homosexuality is the deadliest of all sins. So I was just curious as to why homosexuality would be propped up and labeled as the deadliest sin as opposed to like murder or something.
I'm fairly certain. So I'm fairly certain that is not what he actually said. I think what you're referring to is Michael Knowles said that pride is the deadliest sin, right? Not gay pride, just pride generally. Yeah. And so he said that any aspect in which you are sinning and then you are prideful about your sin is the deadliest sin. So he wasn't saying that, like, if you're prideful about being a murderer, presumably that would be, according to Knowles, the deadliest sin. I really, really doubt. I mean, I know Michael pretty well. I really don't think that Michael thinks that of all the sins that human beings can commit, homosexual activity is the deadliest sin by any stretch. By the way, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any religious figure who actually believes that homosexual activity is the deadliest of all sin. I mean, even the people who are super anti-gay activity, people who think that it's a real sin. I mean, the perspective of religious people that I've found is that, I mean, everybody sins. This is one sin among many sins. The entire chapter in Leviticus that talks about homosexual activity lists off 45 different types of sexual activity that are banned, right? Not 45, but it's more like at least a dozen, maybe a couple of dozen, right? You're not supposed to sleep with your aunt. You're not supposed to sleep with animals. You're not supposed to sleep with your father's wife, right? Like there's like a bunch of them. And homosexual activity is just one of many. So to say that it's like ranked higher on the scale of sin, that I don't think Michael has ever said, nor do I think Michael maintains that. What he has said is that if you are running around shouting about how you are proud that you are committing what is a biblical sin, then that would be a weird thing to do no matter what the biblical sin is. So I just want to be fair to Michael, who, I mean, let's be real about this. Michael's the worst, but I don't think that Michael actually said that, right. Mario.
Okay. So is it because of that pride that you think that there's a particular resentment for homosexuality in religious groups? And what can people like me who, like, I'm a gay conservative, so like what can people like me do who maybe don't prescribe to a lot of the different things that come along with, you know, the LGBT community, the hookup culture, the drugs, and well, I mean, over-sexualizing.
First of all, I'm not sure that anybody should be particularly proud of the sex that they are having as a general rule, right? Like, so it's one part of your life, right? I mean, it's just as my sexual relationship with my wife is one part of my life. Some people consider that sinful. Some people consider that not sinful. Frankly, you know, I'm not sure why you should care what I have to say about it, right? I mean, like if I may not like your perspective, you may not like mine. As long as I'm not attempting to cram down my perspective via the power of government, then I don't see why there really should be a conflict on all of this. I mean, when we're talking politics specifically, we are talking about the role of the federal government or the role of the state government in policing particular activity. I don't know a single Republican in America, really. I mean, they may exist. I mean, I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm sure there's some. But I don't know any Republicans right now who are calling for the outlawing of gay sex, for example. Like that I think went by the wayside in Lawrence versus Texas. I mean, in terms of Supreme Court law, which was 2003. So it's been quite a while here. So as far as sort of the generalized perspective on why so many conservatives are upset about it, I think conservatives are upset about a couple of things when it comes to sort of the gay pride movement. One is the suggestion that homosexual marriage and heterosexual marriage are identical and the same and worth the same in terms of moral value. And that is a critique with which I generally agree. I think that homosexual relationships are not built around the bearing and rearing of children, whereas heterosexual relationships ideally were supposed to be. For that matter, by the way, not all heterosexual relationships are created equal, right? This is why I am not in favor of men and women living together in so-called sin, right, as a religious person. So that I think people disagree with. I think the idea that religious people are to be, that their children are to be forced by the state to be taught this particular version of sexual values, namely that any value, that sexual consent is the only value. That's something that religious people don't believe, right? Religious people believe that consent is a value, but it is not the only value, meaning there's lots of things people consent to that on a religious level I object to and think is a problem. But when it comes to government, then we all agree, then we generally agree that consent is the typical value that matters the most, Mario.
Yeah, okay. So outside, sorry to bog up the line, but outside of politics then on like the cultural level and in personal relationships, what might be the best way for me to I don't know exactly what the question is.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that if the question is, are religious people sitting in judgment on you and judging you and making fun of you behind your back or something, I don't think that's right. I really don't. I mean, not if they're good religious people. Let me put it that way. I think that, I'm not going to play the I have gay friends card because it's stupid. But the reality is that most religious people and most conservative people know people who are gay, and even if they believe that the homosexual activity itself is a sin, I know tons of people who are sinners. I'm a sinner. We're all sinners. I've yet to meet a religious person who doesn't believe that we all sin. And then the question is how you deal with that sin. And I don't actually have to, believe that what you're doing is not a sin in order to say that you're a human being who's trying his best and a human being who's trying to do what they feel is right in life. And we can disagree on sin. That's okay. And you can't force me to think that what you're doing is not sinful, and I can't force you to agree that you ought to cease a particular activity via force of government.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to feel like you're fighting against resentment from certain people, but outside of that, I'm not going to bog up the line anymore.
Yeah, I mean, Mario, all I would say is that I don't. Religious people say this all the time, and it is actually true. Religious people resent sin; they do not resent the sinner. And if they resent the sinner and not the sin, then they're not being religious. They're actually violating the precepts of their own religion. And you can ask any pastor or priest about this; they would agree. Any rabbi, same thing. Okay, really appreciate it, Mario. Thanks so much. Okay, let's see. Who else? Matthew in Fredericksburg. You're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Matthew.
Hi, yes. So I'm obviously living in Virginia, and we're going through our government here, all the gun laws that are trying to pass, gun control, red flag laws, and so forth. I'm curious as to if you know how much, after all this is said and done, that the federal government could step in and try to stop this infringement on our Second Amendment.
So I think that it is quite unlikely that the federal government has the ability to step in too much with regard to Virginia gun laws. It's up to the Supreme Court, unfortunately. Theoretically, you could have the federal government pass concealed carry reciprocity, for example, and suggest that the Privileges and Immunities Clause applies to gun ownership, that if you have a gun license in one state, you should be able to carry that across state lines into another state. That could be done at the federal level, but I don't think that the federal army is going to be sent in order to stop the state of Virginia from passing gun law. I mean, there's effective gun law in California and New York and Massachusetts, all over the country. So unfortunately, it's going to have to be fought out at the state level, Matthew, which, by the way, is probably where it should be fought out. I mean, people tend to forget that the Constitution of the United States originally applied only to the federal government. The Second Amendment, there may be a provision in the Virginia state constitution about gun ownership. I actually don't know the Virginia Constitution all that well. But on the federal level, the powers that were prevented from government on the federal level were prevented from government on the federal level. That didn't necessarily mean they were prevented from government on the state level.
Right, yeah, and of course we don't want to, a government that just comes into every state every time they don't like something and intervenes.
Right.
We don't want that.
Right, exactly. I mean, if we have to opt for it, we just have to do harder work at the state level. And it seems like people in Virginia are doing that, by the way. I think that the fight back against gun control in Virginia will in the end be successful. There are too many gun owners and too many people who believe in gun rights in Virginia for that to end any differently. Ian in Thousand Oaks, California, on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Ian.
Fan of yours, but I don't necessarily agree with your stance on the Beatles, and I was wondering if you would be willing to change your opinion on John Lennon's song Imagine.
No. I'd be willing to hear a case, but I cannot say I will find that case convincing, nor that I will take it particularly seriously. It's a horrible, horrible song. It is a pretentious, ridiculous song. Its suggestion that if you imagined a world without borders, religion, or heaven, that this would suddenly make things better, that's just the Soviet Union. No borders, no religion, no heaven, brotherhood of man, except for the several tens of millions of people we're going to have to murder in order to effectuate that end. It's a horrible song. It's just a horrible song. Ian, I appreciate the call, but I do appreciate your optimism that you thought that I would actually go for that. Alrighty, coming up, we're going to bring you the latest in the Democratic 2020 race. Is Michael Bloomberg the man with the momentum? This is the Ben Shapiro Show.